You're wearing a sweater that was selected for you by the people in this room from a pile of stuff.
Give me a full ballerina skirt and a hint of saloon, and I'm on board.
I have a hole in my stomach!
I can't go back.
Welcome to the She Became Visible podcast. I'm your host, Renee Steelman. This podcast is my story. It's your story. It's our story. It's all the stories of all the women who one day knew that it was time to remember who they were, who they are, and stand up and be seen. Hey, hello. It is Monday, and I am just jumping on really quick to share a few of my thoughts that I have had. I did 2 podcasts last week. One of them was with my fabulous women. We did a panel discussion of the recent words of Camille Johnson at a BYU address. And then I did a podcast with these women, plus Rebecca Biblioteca, and we rehashed the words that Camille Johnson shared at her BYU address. And I cannot end by those 2 podcasts because one of my friends remarked and commented on some of the comments that were on Camille Johnson's Instagram. And so I jumped on Instagram quickly and read some of the comments that were shared after her talk. The first comment that was given was by Dallin Oaks, and he complimented her and told her what a fabulous example she was for all of the women in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the world. And then other people went on to express the same kind of feelings that my friends and I had. And then there were a lot of other comments that said things like, these were never policies, they were simply guidelines. And that is what is keeping me awake at night, is the idea in the Mormon Church that when the prophet speaks, he is simply giving us guidelines. That is completely antithetical for what the Mormon Church teaches. Now, I didn't want to take the time to go back and find the quote from a sister that spoke a number of years ago. This was in the 70s. And she literally said, when the prophet speaks, the thinking stops. And those are the kind of teachings that I grew up with as a child and a young adult and an older adult in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Now, I also did not want to take the time to find the quote, and please do this on your own, by the current prophet of the church, Russell M. Nelson, who clearly stated once he was established as the new prophet, the very first thing he did was to disavow the name that the Mormon Church has been going by for 200 years. The Mormon Church. He said the term Mormon Church is offensive to God. And immediately all logos, all references, websites, everything was changed to completely scrub the Mormon. The Tabernacle Choir was renamed the Tabernacle Choir. The Mormon Tabernacle Choir name was obliterated. And that is how strongly this prophet feels that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints should be the name of this church and should be the only name that it goes by. And he went so far as to make the members of the church think and react to his policy stating that it was a revelation from God that no longer would this church be called the Mormon Church. It would be called the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And the people in the church, the members of the church, accepted that as a revelation. They accepted the words from Russell M. Nelson and immediately not only stopped calling the Mormon Church, they would now correct other people and become offended themselves if they heard the term Mormon Church. Now, I want to ask all of you that commented on Camille Johnson's Instagram, was that a guideline or was that a direct statement from a prophet from God that this is the new policy and doctrine of the church? You're not taking this as a guideline. You're taking this as a commandment. Why and how do we get to pick and choose which are guidelines and which are commandments? So I want to go back and just share a few references that I have from my life, why I feel so strongly about this. So let me start out by showing you the main. In 1977, the prophet of the church was Spencer W. Kimball, and he made very direct, very clear statements on what the woman's role in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I will only refer to it as Mormon from this point on, what the role was for women. He made it very clear that this was not his doctrine, that this was a doctrine that came directly from God. And then in 1987, the current president was Ezra Taft Benson, and he quoted Spencer W. Kimball. So this is the talk that he gave. And as you can see, this is a very old man who was raised on a farm in Idaho and has very old man, white Idaho farmer mentality. Okay. Sorry if I've offended anyone.
And have them early. And husbands, always be considerate of your wives in the bearing of children. Do not curtail the number of your children for personal or selfish reasons. Material possessions, social convenience, and so-called professional advantages are nothing compared to a righteous posterity.
I don't think that could be any clearer. The prophet of God speaking to the world is saying, do not limit the number of children that you have. Do not put off having children, and do not put off or limit the number of children that you have so that you can pursue professions, education, material advantage. It was very, very clear. And this was in 1987 after my youngest child was 2 years old at the time. My husband and I have 6 children. So let me go on.
In the eternal perspective, children, not possessions, not position, not prestige, are our great jewels. Brigham Young emphasized, there are multitudes of pure and holy spirits waiting to take tabernacles. Now, what is our duty? To prepare tabernacles for them, to take a course that will not tend to drive those spirits into the families of the wicked.
Now, who is he referring to? And clearly, if you are not a Mormon or if you are not raised Mormon, you will not understand this doctrine. But the Mormon Church teaches that we lived in a pre-existence before we came to earth. And the purpose for coming to earth was to receive a body. And the purpose of polygamy and the purpose of multiple wives is to produce spirit children. The more spirit children you have, then the more advanced you will become. And those spirit children need to come to this earth to receive physical bodies. And what Ezra Taft Benson is saying right here is that if you Mormons don't have more children, those spirits will go into the homes of the wicked. And the wicked are people who are not Mormons. That is directly what he is saying.
where they will be trained in wickedness and debauchery and every species of crime. It is the duty of every righteous man and woman to prepare tabernacles for all the spirits they can. Yea, blessed is the husband and wife who have a family of children. The deepest joys and blessings in life are associated with parenthood and sacrifice. To have those sweet spirits come into the home is worth practically any sacrifice.
Now, again, Camille Johnson had 3 children. She put off having her children until she had passed the bar. So she had completely gone through a bachelor's degree and law school before she had her first child. So she completely went against the policy and the doctrine directed from God through his prophet who was living on the earth and was her prophet at the time of her youth. She was in her 20s. And so she completely went against this doctrine. Now, let me fast forward this a little bit. Hopefully I'll find something. Here we go. Let's see what this is.
And their callings and responsibilities. I am impressed tonight to share with you some of his inspired pronouncements. I fear that much of his counsel has gone unheeded, and families have suffered because of it. But I stand this evening as a second witness to the truthfulness of what President Spencer W. Kimball said. He spoke as a true prophet of God. President Kimball declared, "Women are to take care of the family. The Lord has so stated, to be an assistant to the husband, to work with him, but not to earn the living, except in unusual circumstances."
Could that be any clearer? Could that be any more direct?
Men ought to be men indeed and earn the living under normal circumstances. President Kimball continues, "Too many mothers work away from home to furnish sweaters and music lessons and trips and fun for their children."
Now I ask you, was Camille Johnson seeking a law degree, working for a law firm in Utah for over 30 years so that she could provide music lessons for her children? She talked many times of the financial sacrifice that she made as a lawyer to not stay in that law firm, but to take leave of absences to serve missions for the church. She talked about the sacrifice that she made. And she never mentions her husband or what her husband does, or that she was simply supplementing his income, or that he was unable to work for some reason and she had to be the sole breadwinner. She never stated that, which was directly goes against what the prophet was saying at that time.
Too many spend their time in socializing, in politicking, in public services, when they should be home to teach and train and receive the love of their children into security.
Okay, now this is really important because the church is suffering right now as numbers are decreasing and as young people are not going on missions. And so they're asking for seniors, people that are retired or financially capable of serving missions. They are starving for seniors to go on missions. Now, I have a couple of friends that are on missions, and what they're doing is they're leaving their family, they're leaving their children, they're leaving their grandchildren to go and serve in communities all over the world to get involved in community activities, working in food banks, preparing meals for the missionaries, serving in administrative callings for the mission and for the church, and which goes completely against what President Benson is stating right here.
Remember the counsel of President Kimball to John and Mary. Mary, you are to become a career woman in the greatest career on earth, that of homemaker, wife, and mother.
Okay. Anyway, that just gives you an idea. You can find this on YouTube if you want to listen to the whole thing. But this is the directive that I was given as a 32-year-old woman with 6 children. Even though my son was born with severe disabilities and demanded 24/7 care, I felt guilty that we had stopped at only 6 and wondered if maybe perhaps we should adopt. That's how strongly I was following the prophet. Now, I want to switch topics a little bit and go on to my next prophet. Now, this was the prophet after this prophet died. And Gordon B. Hinckley actually married my husband and I in the Salt Lake Temple. My husband went on a mission, and his mission president was this guy's son, Ezra Taft Benson. And so we had a little bit of a connection. And back in those days, in 1974, things were a lot smaller. And I had heard President Hinckley at talks he had given when I was stationed in Japan in the U.S. Navy. And I just absolutely loved him. And I wrote him a letter and said, would you marry my husband and I? And he said, sure, why not? Walked across the street from the temple. The Salt Lake Temple was right across the street from the administration building. And Mark Benson was there, and he married my husband and I. I love President Hinckley. I think he was a good man that was absolutely worked to death. He made some bad choices. He said some things that weren't true, but deep down inside, I feel as though he was a sincere man who truly, truly was trying to serve the Lord in the best way that he knew how. Now, this particular talk was given at a conference that I was literally in the room, to quote Hamilton. I was in the room listening when this talk was given. And this was in the 80s, if I remember correctly. It might have been in the 90s. I don't remember. When I downloaded this, I didn't look it up. But it was kind of when women getting tattoos was getting to be okay. And I thought, I want to get a tattoo. And then I went to a conference, and this is what I heard.
I cannot understand why any young man or young woman, for that matter, would wish to undergo the painful process of disfiguring the skin with various multicolored representations of people, animals, and various symbols. With tattoos, the process is permanent, unless there's another painful and costly undertaking to remove it. Fathers, caution your sons against having their bodies tattooed.
Now, I think it's funny right here that he's specifically saying, fathers, talk to your sons. Because at the time, women were still not comfortable getting tattoos, and there was still a stigma around women that got tattoos. So he was mostly addressing the men here.
They may resist your talk now, but the time will come when they will thank you. A tattoo is graffiti on the temple of the body. Likewise, the piercing of the body from multiple rings in the ears, in the nose, even in the tongue. Can they possibly think that is beautiful? It is a passing fancy, but its effects can be permanent. Some have gone to such extremes that the ring had to be removed by surgery. The First Presidency and Quorum of the 12 have declared that we discourage tattoos and also the piercing of the body for other than medical purposes.
Now, did you hear what he said? He specifically is stating that the First Presidency is declaring that this should not happen. This should be avoided. And I remember going to a wedding for a young girl who the story was, and I noticed when she was kneeling at the altar, through her white stockings, I noticed that she had an ankle tattoo. And at this time I was like, oh my gosh, how did she get into the temple? And I heard later that this gentleman that she was marrying actually really struggled with whether or not he should marry her because of this ankle tattoo. That is how direct and instructive this was to all of us at the time.
We do not, however, take any position on the minimal piercing of the ears by women for one pair of earrings, one pair.
Now, this was also taken very seriously. At the time, I had 2 piercings, and I immediately took out my second piercing. And I did not wear anything more than 1 piercing for years. And it wasn't until I realized that once you've had a piercing, that hole really never goes away. And I had to decide which was uglier, having 2 holes and this weird dip in your earlobe, or just sticking a little gold ball or a little diamond earring in it. And it was probably 20 years after this statement was made that I put my double piercing back in. And even when you would go and attend the temple, they would very clearly tell you if you had anything more than 1 pair of earrings that you should take that out. That was, and you were judged quite harshly. And it was very clear to everyone that the prophet of the church has declared 1 piercing only. Now, let me show you what happened when the church decided in 2022 that maybe we could let people govern themselves. Maybe we could let people use their free agency. And this is what a current apostle said.
Christ of Latter-day Saints has prepared a new resource, a revised version of For the Strength of Youth. For over 50 years, For the Strength of Youth has been a guide for generations of Latter-day Saints youth. I always keep a copy in my pocket, close to my heart, and I share it with people who are curious about our standards. It has been updated and refreshed to better.
Now, what he's saying there is that for 50 years, there was a pamphlet that the youth of the church were given, and it had very direct specifics. This is okay. This is not okay. You can do this. You can't do this. It was very black and white. And they've revised it in 2022. And this is what they came up with.
Cope with the challenges and temptations of our day. The new version for the Strength of Youth is now available. Now, today, online in 50 different languages, and will be a significant help for making choices in your life. Please embrace it as your own and share it with your friends. This new version of For the Strength of Youth is subtitled A Guide for Making Choices.
Okay, now what's happening here is they are really struggling to keep the youth in the church. And so in 2022, they decided, well, maybe we can lay back a little bit. And we're going to start using the word guide. It's a guide. Talk to your parents, talk to your bishop, talk to your leaders, make these decisions through prayer. And this is why the youth of the church and the Gen X's and Gen Z's and millennials, not so much the millennials, are now using this word guide. It's just a guide. That was never used for my generation and probably for hundreds of years. The idea that when the prophet speaks, it is literally just a guide. But this is where it came from. In 2022, they thought, let's just try and see if we lighten up a little bit, that people will make really good choices. And so this is what happened after they decided that maybe these people could make really good choices.
A covenant is a commitment to fulfill certain responsibilities. Personal commitments are essential to the regulation of our individual lives and to the functioning of society. This idea is currently being challenged. A vocal minority oppose institutional authority and insists that persons should be free from any restrictions that limit their individual freedom. Yet we know from millennia of experience that persons give up some individual freedoms to gain the advantages of living in organized communities.
So what he's saying here is that people are starting to think that they don't have to follow the rules, that they can make their own personal choices. Where on earth would they have gotten that idea? Let's talk about why that's not true.
Such relinquishments of individual freedoms are principally based on commitments or covenants, expressed or implied. Here are some examples of covenant responsibilities in our society. Judges, military, medical personnel, and firefighters. All of those involved in these familiar occupations make a commitment, often formalized by oath or covenant, to perform their assigned duties. The same is true of our full-time missionaries. Distinctive clothing or name tags are intended to signify that the wearer is under covenant and therefore has a duty to teach and serve and should be supported in that service.
Now I'm going to fast forward. Basically, why this talk is being given is because there was a little bit of a pullback on the requirements for people who had been married in the temple, that they were required to wear an undergarment. And that garment was to be worn day and night. When I was married in the temple, I was given this garment and I was told that this was to be worn day and night. And for no reason was it to be taken off, except of course to shower. And I even had a beautiful, wonderful bishop that said, of course you're going to take it off when you have sex, but when you're done, put it right back on again. That is how explicit it was made to me that how these garments were to be worn. But suddenly there was a new generation of people who was under the impression that those were just guidelines, that there really wasn't a hard and fast rule about how we were to wear our garments, because it was up to us. We could pray about it. We could receive personal revelation, and then we could decide if we were going to follow those rules. So what President Dallin Oaks is saying is, once you've made a promise, like if you were a medical doctor or someone in the military, you give up your free agency. You basically do what you're told. I was in the military. I understand what he's saying here. You don't get to decide whether you're going to storm the front. If your commanding officer says storm the front, you go. You don't get to stop and say, let me pray about it and decide if that's what I'm going to do. And that's clearly what he's saying. We told you what to do. We're not giving you a choice. You are to do it.
A related purpose is to remind the wearers of their covenant responsibilities. There's no magic in their distinctive clothing or symbols, only a needed reminder of the special responsibilities the wearers have assumed. This is also true of the symbols of the
Let me fast forward this a little bit.
Young prophet. We do know he told Joseph that God had a work for him to do, witness, which means solemnly testify, quote, of the effect of our baptism and our weekly partaking.
Okay, I'm just going to take him off. So basically, I want to close here by just making it very, very clear that there is a generational gap going on here. There is a generation of youth that were told that certain things were guidelines. And then there's a generation of people in this church that were told these are not guidelines. These are complete directives given to you by God through the mouth of a prophet who is living on the earth for that purpose. And that's where that's why there is such a brouhaha going on right now with the talk that was given by Camille Johnson. So I would really encourage you to understand where these divisions are coming from and to not erase the past. when the new generation comes up and says, because they're not familiar with the history or they didn't experience the history that we did, they erase that history and claim that it never happened and basically infer that we were just stupid, that we didn't understand how free agency works. And I think that's why it's so offensive. So I hope this gives you a little bit of insight on why this little talk by Camille Johnson is causing such a brouhaha in the church right now. But please make it known that this church that claims to have consistent revelation and that it is line upon line, precept upon precept, is basically a church written by men who are changing for cultural reasons, for economic reasons, and for who knows how many reasons, but for the same reasons why things culturally and economically change in the world in general. So thanks for joining me this day for my little rant, and I hope that it gives you some information. All right, bye-bye.